soon or today, how would the parties fare? How strong would the ideological blocs in parliament, the Knesset, be? And who do Israelis still think is the best choice to serve as prime minister? Well, for some answers, let's look at the results of a new poll carried out for i24NEWS by the Geocartography Knowledge Group. First, let's look at the parties. If elections were held today, who would you vote for? Likud still in the lead, 28, holding strong. Yamina, that's the big story. Naftali Bennett's right-wing party at 25 seats. Yesh Atid dropping a bit in this poll to 15. The Blue and White Party, a dozen. That's Benny Gantz's party at 12. The joint list, which includes Arab parties, at 12 seats. The religious Shas party at 9. The also religious United Torah Judaism party at 8. The left-wing Meretz party at 6. And the Yisrael Beitenu party of Avigdor Lieberman at 5. So how would this play out in what we call the ideological blocs? Remember, you need 61 seats to form a majority in the 120-seat parliament. Well, the joint list has never been in any government, so it is 12 seats. The center-left, 33 seats. Yisrael Beitenu, which is broken from the right, still at 5. But the right and religious parties, they would have 70 seats. But we need to break down those numbers a little bit more, especially the blocs. So we're joined for this by our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman, who speaks to us from Petach Tikva. And Owen, let's start looking at the results. I would say those results are certainly not, if we're talking about Prime Minister Netanyahu going to election, certainly on the basis of the Likud party, those are not terrible results.
Yeah, I think that's a good description, Calev, from Netanyahu and Likud's perspective. Not terrible. Obviously, a terrific poll for Naftali Bennett. A reasonable poll, actually, for Benny Gantz, given the circumstances. A much less positive poll, of course, for Yesh Atid and for Yair Lapid. And for that matter, by the way, interestingly enough, for the joint list as well, which would go down to 12 seats from its current 15 in the Israeli parliament. You know, other polls have shown Likud starting to rebound and starting to pull away from Yamina. Our poll showing the two continue to be neck and neck to some degree. But interestingly enough, look, if you ask people below the question, who are you voting for? How sure are you of your vote? That's where Likud does better than most of the other parties. The 28 seats that they do have, Calev, would seem to be safer because a higher percentage of their voters say that they are sure to vote for Likud, reflecting just how strong of a following Likud has among its loyal base. So that could hold Netanyahu in good stead. But obviously, if these are the final numbers, he won't be entirely satisfied to see Naftali Bennett and Yamina nipping at his heels.
Just one thing about on the blocs, a big question whether Yamina is certainly a right-wing party, but whether it would join with Netanyahu after he basically has left them out of this government.
That's right. And we heard Ayelet Shaked just say over the last day or two that Yamina is willing to work with any Zionist party, presumably including those parties on the center left. Of course, Calev, from Yamina's perspective, that is easier said than done. Their voters certainly would expect them to go into a right-wing government. That said, Naftali Bennett has told his voters and told the public over the last few months that he potentially wants to be prime minister, sees himself as a candidate for prime minister. He certainly is critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his handling of the pandemic. So we'll have to wait and see.
Well, speaking of prime minister, let's look at the public's preferences for premier. According to the poll, Benjamin Netanyahu, 29% say he should be PM, while 33% say he shouldn't be not. Naftali Bennett trails at 19%, 24% say no. Ayelet Shaked, also of his party, 10% say should, 38% should not. Yair Lapid, 10% should, 50% say not. Benny Gantz, 9% yes. 34% say should not. Gidon Sa'ar, who's a contender for the Likud leadership for Netanyahu, 9% should be prime minister, 27% should not. And Moshe Bogi Ya'alon, 6% should PM, 43% should not. Avigdor Lieberman, 5% should be PM, 62% not. Yuli Edelstein, the now health minister of Likud, 4% should be PM, 39% should not. Well, I think the big story is Benjamin Netanyahu dominates that discourse, gets by far the most vote percentage of people who should be, but clearly there is a percentage of the country that doesn't want to see him again as prime minister.
Yeah, Calev, everybody's underwater, but other than Netanyahu and Bennett, everybody's just drowning. There's no leader from the center left really at all. And I think Bennett obviously will be pleased with these numbers, and not only in this poll, but he's been making headway on that all-important question for him. That said, again, if you look behind the numbers, the fact that Netanyahu in some sense, at the trough of his popularity, given his handling of the pandemic. He has started to rebound in recent weeks. He'll have more time to do it. Naftali Bennett, if he has any chance at his party passing the Likud and at himself becoming prime minister, needs this to be an election about the pandemic. And Calev, with vaccines on their way, it's, I think, 50-50 whether that's going to happen, really in Netanyahu and Gantz's hands. But when these elections are, if they're in June, going to be a much, much tougher climb for Naftali Bennett. If they're in March, and that, of course, is very much a live possibility, it's going to depend on when these vaccines are going to be coming to Israel. That's the news of the hour, and it may well be the news of that first quarter of 2021 over the course of the election campaign. Naftali Bennett has staked his political future on challenging Netanyahu's handling of the pandemic. He has reaped wholesome political rewards for that, putting him in this position where his party is only a few seats behind the Likud. Calev, something that would have been unthinkable 6 months, 12 months ago. But again, to actually get to that finish line, Bennett needs this to be an election about the pandemic. You certainly would have to continue to give Benjamin Netanyahu the upper hand, even the strong upper hand. Even as we see, and Israelis don't tend to want anybody as prime minister. Obviously, a famously fractured Israeli public. You can see it on this question as well.
Right, and I will just note, not good news in that last numbers for Benny Gantz, who may yet become the prime minister if the rotation agreement goes through. But clearly, there were once polls showed him equal to or even greater than Benjamin Netanyahu, and clearly he is now, in terms of the public estimation, not seen or as really challenging the stature of Prime Minister Netanyahu to be prime minister. Owen Alterman, thank you so much for coming.